So, what you find is people, especially with phones, the way we take photographs is always from eye level. And so unless you're kind of being purposeful about it, you get your phone out and eye level and you kind of click around. Maybe you decide whether to have it in landscape or portrait. And unfortunately, those decisions seem to be dictated about how well it's going to look on Instagram. Now everyone's gone back to portrait because it takes up more of your screen. And so, when you only take photographs from eye level, you miss out a whole world of storytelling because the camera is a powerful tool, but it's not a brain, and it doesn't have the kind of depth that when we're actually experiencing a place we bring to it. So, you have to add that depth.
Hi, tourpreneurs. My name is Mitch Bach, your host of the Tourpreneur Travel Business Podcast, and we're back with another episode. This week, we are talking to Mikaela Toczek, who is the founder of More to Explore, a tour company based in Slovenia. It's a tour company that dives deep into the most beautiful landscapes I've seen in a while. I'm looking at Mikaela's homepage right now, and it just says, explore and experience Slovenia's wild places. Step into a world of enchanting forests, breathtaking mountains, and emerald waters. And I already feel like I'm there right now. But the topic of today is not going to be Slovenia per se. It's going to be photography, that thing that can sort of unlock the magic and the beauty of a place. But for tour operators, it's also often a bit of a battle. Tour guests that are mindlessly sort of throwing out their iPhones in the most inopportune moments and snapping away at everything, treating a tour like just an Instagram background. Of course, the I word influencers and the hats, and using the tour not as a chance to be transformed and immersed and connected to each other, but as a way to get more likes. And so there's a lot of issues around photography. There's a lot of questions that we generally have, I think, about what it means to lead your guests somewhere special and interesting through imagery, and also when to tell guests maybe put that phone away and just actually enjoy and explore. So there's a lot of issues around this, and I'm excited today to be talking about Mikaela because this conversation came naturally bubbling up through a conversation in our Facebook group. And it dawned on me, instead of just discussing it in a little thread in the Facebook group, we should make a podcast about it because it's that important. And here we are. Mikaela, welcome to Tourpreneur.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me, Mitch. It's a real pleasure to be here and chatting to you about this topic.
Start with me and just give me a little bit more background on More to Explore and also on yourself.
Yeah, thanks. So More to Explore came about when we moved to Slovenia with our young family. My husband's Slovene, so we have family connections here. And initially, when we were looking at where we wanted to live, we're like, let's go and live in the big mountains. And pretty soon we started to realize that actually that's not where we wanted to live. We wanted to live closer to family, and that meant being in an area that didn't have quite so much tourism. It was still beautiful. We live in the most forested area of Slovenia, so it's about 70% covered in forest with incredible rivers, but there aren't really any operators working here. And prior to moving to Slovenia, I was freelance for many years, leading overseas expeditions and trips and guiding in the UK and beyond as well. And mostly for young people, but some adult groups too. And it kind of felt like the perfect opportunity for me to launch my own business with a focus on going to areas of Slovenia that are less visited, less known, and kind of taking a step back from the prime hotspots. And with that came my love of photography. So I have a background as a documentary photographer. I studied photojournalism and then taught photography to 16 to 18-year-olds for a number of years before I kind of branched off into the freelance world. And, all of this kind of comes together in the business More to Explore. And, it's about the connections that we make, not just with each other in our groups, but also with the hosts that we're staying with, the local providers, and the places that we're visiting. And because they're kind of off the tourist track, it creates this opportunity where people don't quite know what they're going to expect. And I purposefully kind of keep things sort of a little bit hidden and a little bit kind of open to surprise. And that then influences how we expect to use our cameras and how we photograph. And so it kind of all merged together really with the creation of the business, which is still a young business. We're only coming into our third year, but yeah, it's really exciting, and it creates interesting opportunities such as this to talk about these topics.
If it makes you feel better, if you were 6 years old, you would have still done the same number of in-person tours because it would have been over COVID. When you look at the kind of like I don't know, I guess the roots of who you are and how you're thinking about bringing that photography into your tours. In the Facebook group, you use this phrase conscious photography, which really struck me because it feels like a lot of photography in groups is unconscious and sort of just a knee-jerk reaction. Talk to me a little bit about that phrase and about what photography means in the context of a travel experience for you.
Yeah, so perhaps it helps to kind of wind all the way back, because when I first started guiding, I was very much into the kind of history of photography and where travel photography and landscape photography has come from and how that's evolved. And on the very first trip that I assisted on, I took a huge medium format camera with me that only has 12 shots per roll of film and lugged it around Thailand and Laos with my groups. It created this interesting resonance where people were asking me, like, well, why have you got this camera with you that has almost no capability to take lots of photographs, takes a long time to set up, and it has almost zero spontaneity? I was like, well, that's not why I take photographs. For me, it creates an opportunity to pause and reflect. And with that kind of camera, you have to be conscious with every photograph. You really have to think about it and decide. Each one is precious, you only have 12. Each one is really, really precious. And so you're kind of sitting and reflecting, and then comes a point where you're like, no, this is something that contributes to the story. And for me, that's the key. It's the narrative that um, is creates this story of the place and the people and the whole experience together. And so, what you find is people, especially with phones, the way we take photographs is always from eye level. And so unless you're kind of being purposeful about it, you get your phone out and eye level and you kind of click around. Maybe you decide whether to have it in landscape or portrait. And unfortunately, those decisions seem to be dictated about how well it's going to look on Instagram. Now everyone's gone back to portrait because it takes up more of your screen. And so, when you only take photographs from eye level, you miss out a whole world of storytelling because, the camera is a powerful tool, but it's not a brain, and it doesn't have the kind of depth that when we're actually experiencing a place we bring to it. So, you have to add that depth. And for me, the conscious photography kind of element of my trips came about when I kind of started leading in a way where people were asking me about photography because it's part of my background. And, what photography equipment should I bring? I was like, it doesn't matter what photography equipment you bring, it's how you tell the story that matters. And, well, what does that entail? It's like, well, okay, you have to really think about that kind of why, and each person's why is different. And part of that will tend to be the places that you're visiting. But, what you find when you take those photos home is that actually people that you're showing them to are more interested in the people in the photographs and how you're looking. Oh, you look like you're really enjoying yourself. You look like you're having an amazing time in these places. And it's creating that balance. And I think, collectively we can contribute to a story. And if we do that as a group, then you're going to end up with a really amazing kind of a really amazing collection at the end of it that's contributed by everybody. So instead of, when we get to a viewpoint, instead of everybody giving the guide their cameras and saying, can you take a picture of me? Can you take a picture of me? Can you do it with my camera? Can you do it with my camera? I generally at the beginning of a trip say, well, look, we're here as a group. Photography is obviously going to play a really important part. I'm inviting you all to think about how we want our stories to look and what's important to us, and to share that experience together. So when we get to a place where we all want to take photographs, to just stop and pause and think about well, you've just seen someone take an amazing photo and we can all share that. We don't need to all have exactly the same image on our phones. And, often I'm taking photographs as well. So that also, I think, helps people to feel like they can switch off, because I'll always say at the beginning, I'm going to be taking photographs. I'm going to be documenting the trip. And at the end, I will share, and we will all share with each other through our WhatsApp groups the photos. So if you feel like you don't want to use your camera at all, that's great. Switch off and let us do it for you. And then you can just enjoy it after and sharing it with us as a group.
Do you do any sort of tutorial on how to take a great photo or what makes a great photo on your tours?
So not actively, I don't advertise on my tours that they're photography tours, and we don't kind of promote that you're going to learn about photography as part of it. But, I do tend to chat about it because it always ends up happening organically as part of the trips. And if anyone asks me, then, we'll talk about how we tell stories with images. And what I tend to say is you need a mix. You can learn about the different methods of composition. There's four main methods of composition that you find people end up using. And once you know that, then you can mix it up. So it's like, okay, so, I just took a kind of close-up photograph of an amazing flower or something that fills the frame of my image. And the next one's a landscape. And then you can see how it fits in together. And then it's kind of someone doing something that's active, and that kind of ties in with how we're moving through the place. And so it's all of it. It's thinking about the details. It's thinking about the journey. It's thinking about the people and the place, and making sure we're kind of getting in close, moving away, changing our perspective from high to low, not always being at eye level. And just really kind of, when you look back at your photographs, do you see variety that kind of holds your attention and tells the story in an interesting way? Or do you just see the kind of same composition again and again and again and again throughout the trip? And it's that variety that really makes and helps a good story to be told. And so we do talk about that on my trips, and some guests are more engaged with it than others, and it kind of just tends to happen as we're walking along. All of my trips involve a kind of hike and a swim or a bike ride, and just as we're going, we'll just chat about it.
I feel like every tour is kind of a photography tour these days. Not a technical one where you've got, the men and their giant lenses, but something that is predominantly an experience that has image creation at like a pretty core part of it. It's just who we are today in 2025. So I love the idea of baking in just small little moments of education into any tour. Anybody listening, not, I'm not giving you business advice, but to the tour operators out there, I think there's an opportunity to kind of just like give that moment, because you do have somebody that is snapped out of their habitual environment anyway. They're a traveler, they're somewhere new. Take advantage of that moment of them having an open mind and be like, listen, photographs are important. They in fact sort of become stand-ins for your memories in many ways, and the better the photograph, the better the memory.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that was one of the reasons when I started my business that I didn't create photo tours, because I was asked by, colleagues of mine who know me. They're like, oh, so you're going to do photo tours? And I was like, no, I'm not, but it's all going to be part of my tours. And on my website, it kind of says photography is embedded in everything we do. And yeah, I really believe that. And it's so important for guests as well. They, the reason they always have their phones out taking photographs is because it's important to them, and so to create those opportunities where they can perhaps reflect on that a little bit and why it's important, and when to, like you said at the beginning, take a moment, take a beat and just stop and put it away and realize that, oh, okay, actually, I don't need to photograph every single thing. And if I do it in a conscious way, then it can really enhance my experience. And, also on the flip side, thinking about protecting the places that we're visiting, and conscious photography. Yes, it's about the storytelling, and it's about thinking about how our guests interact, and it's about thinking about the memory kind of creation, but it's also about thinking about protecting the places. And so one thing that I always share, and this kind of triggers a lot of conversations about image making, is when we go on a trip, please don't geotag any of your pictures on social media and think about keeping locations as generic rather than specific. And, that comes into conscious photography as well, because it's not just thinking about the photo's impact on us as the guests and the guides and the tour providers, but it's also thinking about the impact on the places that we're visiting and how that could potentially influence those places in the future. So conscious photography for me is about all of those things.
Wow, that's something I hadn't considered, sort of turning off geotagging as just a way to be mindful of the places so they don't become the giant next Instagram hotspot. I feel like there's also a way, even in like a pre-trip email, to be like, if there's an interest in you in photography, here's some of the recommendations, that we have to prepare for, your best kind of photographic experience. You could almost do like a pre-trip email with some like before and afters of like really bad and a really good photo, just like what a change of perspective does, or what a change of having foreground and background dimensionality, or things like that. I don't know. I think you've inspired me to think about a lot of ways in which we can weave in image making into the fabric of what we're doing as storytellers, as guides, and as tour operators. It's part of that storytelling.
100%. And that's what we do, right? As guides and tour providers, our core essence is to tell stories and to share those stories with our guests. And, if we neglect photography and image making, and, also we can include video making in that as well, then we're kind of missing out on such an amazing opportunity to share that part of ways of seeing and reading with others. And, one thing that I like to kind of share with my guests that gets them thinking about it a little bit is that we actually, when people say we read an image, we do actually read an image. We read an image. If you're from a culture where we read from left to right, then we naturally read images from left to right. You start from the top and you read it from the left to the right and then down to the bottom right corner. So you start in the top left corner and you finish in the bottom right corner. And so what you put in that kind of text is up to you, and where you want things to be featured and how you want people to see them. And it happens so fast because it's automatic that we don't realize that we're doing it, but we do.
That's so interesting. I wonder if you've thought about what makes a good vertical photograph. And are there some different rules? I think of like the rule of thirds, stick things in the corners, but it feels a little different when you've changed that landscape, which so many people are doing now for their photos.
Yeah, I mean, there's the kind of classic compositional techniques, like you say, there's the rule of thirds, and there's using leading lines to bring your eye back into an image, and, thinking about what proportion of a frame is filled with what element. So, it might be 3/4 full with something and then 1/4 is left out. But for me, like, it's all of those things. And once you've kind of learnt the basics of composition and light, like the light is the key. You can have amazing composition, but if you have terrible light, then it's going to ruin the image. So, thinking about what's lighting it, how it's lit, where the light's coming from, and how that affects the mood is key alongside composition. But once you've got those things, once you've spent time thinking about it and you've kind of done a bit of practicing and you think, yeah, I kind of know about like the composition and the light, then it comes down to breaking those rules and mixing it up. And, now I guess with my own photography, it happens kind of subconsciously in that, I don't kind of actively think, oh, now I'm going to do a photograph where I'm going to fill the frame. I kind of respond to the moment that I'm in, and that creates the composition. So, it can mean totally different things. Like in winter when I'm leading my snowshoeing tours, it's really incredible when you have like a blank white canvas with just kind of a small group spot in the middle walking across it. That's a really powerful image, but there's not really anything happening in it. There's just a line of people and a white canvas, but it kind of creates that sense of vastness. So, it's different. But if you did the same thing in the summer, it would be a really different image because you would lose the group in amongst all of the other kind of visual information that's happening there. So yeah, it really kind of depends on the situation.
Last year, I interviewed Paul Zak. He's a neuroscientist that studies the idea of immersion. And we use this word all the time, an immersive travel experience. And yet, one of the things that always stuck with me was Paul saying the minute we look at our phone, we're not immersed. We've been snapped out of the moment. And here we are, we're these amazing moment makers, and yet we're robbing our own experiences of their truly immersive power through this little glow stick in our pocket that keeps interrupting attention. How do you think about that in relation to photography? So not only just conscious photography, but conscious non-photography in preservation of the moment.
I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, it does. It's like I said, it kind of it can connect us and equally it can detach us. It can be a barrier to us being able to fully immerse in what we're doing. And that is something that I think we can talk about more with our groups and our guests and, advise when might be a good time. And, it doesn't have to be for a whole trip. It might be like, okay, for the next kind of couple of hours, let's not take any photographs. Let's just be in the place that we're in while we're walking and moving through it and see how that feels. And the conversations that can kind of stem from that can influence the rest of the trip. And, for me, I will build those moments into my tours where we will get to a peak, for example. And before we get to that moment, I will say, okay, so in the next half an hour, we're going to get to the peak. And that's kind of where we're going to be faced with this amazing view and landscape and the feelings that come with having achieved this goal and getting there together. I'm inviting you to keep your phones away in your bags for, a set period of time. You might not choose to get it out at all, but, at least for the first kind of 5, 10, 15 minutes, however long we sort of agree, we're going to agree when we get there that we're not going to get our phones out. Twinned with that, sometimes I will then suggest that, we can take some time when we're there to just sit silently and not engage with kind of any sort of interference and just be where we are and experience how that feels. And that kind of combines this idea of, conscious non-photography, I think, as you phrased it, with connection and immersion. And then after that, we can then invite to, okay, now we're going to take a group photo. And, I will usually do that and take the photo. And after that point, if people then choose to take their own photos, some of them do and some of them don't. And, I have had on my last trip, one of my guests fed back at the end that she really loved how I set out at the beginning of the tour that I was going to be taking these photographs and that I had, a whole mix from my kind of professional camera to my camera phone, and that because of that and because we have this WhatsApp group, if you choose not to take any photographs for the whole trip, you're still going to have an amazing set of photographs at the end. And she shared that it gave her the freedom to choose not to use her phone and not to take photographs. And she didn't really take many photographs at all as part of a trip, and she really relished in that. And so I think giving those opportunities to not take photographs is as important as giving the opportunity to take them.
And most importantly, it needs a real intentional preparation of the guest, like calming them and saying there will be an image of this moment down the road or whatever. And also what struck me about what you said was like, let's do this as a group. Not sort of each of you, I get it, maybe you have to be on your phone or not, it's your trip, do whatever, but like I want as a group for all of us to enter into kind of just the beauty, quiet of this place for the next 15 minutes. It's going to arrive at this magical place, and I have the world's best camera that's going to take the world's best photo of it for you. But between here and there, would you join me on a journey of returning to ourselves for 15 minutes and making it a group activity rather than just like, oh, if you want to do it, but otherwise do your own thing.
Yeah, I think that intentionality is really important, and it sets the tone, and I think it also really brings the group together as well in an amazing way. And it's the invitation, right? We're not here to kind of dictate to people on their holidays and tours what we think is right, but it's offering that invitation to people to say, this is a thing that we're going to invite you to do. And we hope that you feel like it's a valued part of the trip. Normally I think people really engage with that. And like you say, as a group, we do it. And like I always set up a kind of group chat with all my guests kind of a few weeks before we actually go on the tour. So we're already chatting before we go. And then that group becomes the place where we share our images. And, quite often it will be like in the evenings when we get back to our accommodation, someone will be like, oh, I took a really amazing photo of you doing this, and for one of the other group members, and share it in the group. And then everyone's kind of commenting and chatting. It creates this really nice kind of mini community for every trip. And those WhatsApp groups for all of my trips are still there in my kind of communities section. And every now and again, people are still sharing stuff, even from trips that happened a year ago. And I think that's a really great thing.
Yeah. So is that how you are sharing your images with everybody at the end of the trip? You just drop them into a WhatsApp group? Is there a Google Photos album? Like, how are you doing that?
So the way that I currently do it is generally along the way, I'll put in a few key photos from my phone as we're going through the tour, so that guests kind of feel reassured that, oh yeah, she is taking some really nice
She
photos.
won't forget.
Yeah, she's not forgetting to take photos, and they're really good, and they feel kind of happy that if they've chosen not to take so many, that actually they are being taken for them on their behalf. And then at the end of a trip, I'll bring my stuff home from my camera and edit it a little bit, and, pick out the best ones and spend some time kind of curating the story. And then I put those images into a Dropbox folder and share them a link to the Dropbox folder for them to download in the WhatsApp group, and also via email as well. But, generally the WhatsApp group is where most of my guests find that kind of connection. And, I'm sure there's like tools out there that are really designed for this, that are amazing for it. But as a young company, like WhatsApp just kind of happened naturally, and it seems to be working at the moment. Maybe in a few years, I'll be thinking, that was didn't have the right functionality really for this kind of thing. But for now, it seems to be working quite well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, listen, we have some fantastic travel technology partners in our business directory on tourpreneur.com that really do up the game in terms of photo sharing and connectivity around that. We have Pixoris, we have PhotoFlow, we have others that are kind of built into that. I think the most important thing, though, is just get started. That there's a real beautiful thing about sharing those albums. It just feels like a gift. In a confirmation email, it will get people to review you more. If you share some of those images, it takes a little bit more time, but it really does add a little bit of a special connection to your groups. When I'm interested in you talking about photography as storytelling, because I think about this when you're looking at websites and tour product pages and OTA listings, your Get Your Guide listing or whatever. People were just talking about this with Airbnb that sent around a ton of professional, quote unquote, photographers to take photos of all these tours. I was wondering if you could just end with giving some advice to the operators out there in terms of what it means to sort of curate and craft a story of your images, whether you're trying to sell your tours on a tour product page or on your homepage or whatever else. What should they be thinking about?
I mean, for me, it's all about connection. And, with that, the images really need to show like, how are your tours connecting with your guests? And that's quite hard to communicate in a still image. But if you have a variety that's showing, people are kind of engaging and enjoying and participating in an immersed way, that's kind of part of it. But it's more than that, because it's also about showing the narrative of whether it's a multi-day tour or whether it's a single day tour or even just an hour. What's the narrative that you're trying to share with people? Like, what's your message? What's your core values? And we're so good at writing that, but being able to reflect that in a visual image is always going to kind of have an additional power that I think when someone visits your webpage, they're going to connect with on a really kind of instant level. And so, everyone's message is going to be dependent on their own core values of their business. And for me, it's about showing kind of this these inclusive, welcoming and supportive trips. And, that's what I want people to see about my trips. And that's how I want people to feel when I look at the images. So there's lots of images of kind of a group together doing stuff and emphasizing that it's small groups. It's only groups of 8 people. And I emphasize that with my images as well. So, it's putting whatever you've written down in your kind of core message and thinking, how can I communicate that in 2, 3 images on a page? And, I've still not mastered it, but like it's a process, and you have to constantly review it. It's never done. And, each trip and each group as well will end up with a different narrative depending on a group.
I would preface it by saying step one is make sure the photography accurately expresses what the product actually is. Because yesterday I had a business coaching call with an operator who does luxury vehicle tours, and I looked around at their website and there was not a single luxury vehicle on the entire website, much less on the tours. It sort of blew me away that I had zero visual sense of what the tour was going to actually be based on any of the photography. So make sure there's accurate representation of the tour. Step 2, add that Mikaela magic. I absolutely love that your recommendation is start with your own mission statement and say, like, what are we actually about as a company? What are our 3 words? You just gave 3 words about your company. Is this photograph welcoming and inclusive? Does it express that? And if not, time for a new photo. Think today everybody's preferring that they grab that information from the visuals and not from the text. Because the operator came back and said, well, I say luxury vehicle all over my website. I go, yeah, but I just spent 10 minutes looking at your website and I didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
We're bad at text extraction. We're really good at reading a lot into a photograph.
Absolutely. But can I just add to that, because it's really interesting, that kind of choice of what images we're putting and how we're putting them in our websites, because also equally choosing to leave things out strategically is important as well. And like, yes, you need to show the essence of what your trip is about, but also we don't want to give it all away. There's room for magic if we don't give too much away. And, one thing, and actually one of the things that got me thinking about this was a previous Tourpreneur podcast talking about awe. And one of the things that I consciously do is not give too much away in my photographs, to leave room for guests to have their own moments of awe. Because if we constantly share images that show all of the amazing highlights of our trips, then we kind of take away a little bit of a chance for guests to have their own moment of awe. So yeah, think about as well what you're leaving out. Like, yes, you need some beautiful images to, inspire guests to book with you, but, leave some stuff out too.
That was one of my favorite podcasts I ever recorded. And that concept of awe is so incredible. But what goes along with awe is surprise. Is I didn't see this coming. And so don't be overly didactic in your photography and leave rooms for the moments to be a moment of surprise and awe. That's so good. It's editing, right? It's what we're all bad at. Sometimes we need a fresh perspective of a friend or somebody else to look at our photographs and notice, oh wait, there's not a single vehicle on this entire webpage. Could you just tell me a little bit about what's your editing process and what's your thought process around making sure that you do feel like that storytelling is happening?
So again, it kind of depends on what my purpose is. So if it's images that I'm sharing with my guests in my folder post-trip, then I want to kind of reflect that start to finish journey with the kind of all the highlights, with some of those moments of awe that I've kind of captured of them, whether they're choosing to engage with their technology at that moment or not. And, capturing kind of little kind of moments of calm, moments of peace, moments of action, moments of community. And like, for me, that's what I'm thinking about when I'm putting those images together. It's like, okay, we've already got like 3 group shots in this folder. They don't need a group shot of every single day in the folder that's telling the story, or of like, sometimes it's like 5 times a day, right? Like, I will just pick a few from the whole trip. I'm like, okay, these are the few group shots that really talk to me as showing us together as a group, not just standing next to each other, but create that kind of feeling of we're connected as a group. And then it's interspersed with the other things that I've talked about. But it's different to how I'm putting it on my website, because on my website, people looking at it don't know the people who were part of that group. They're not had those moments together. And I tend to kind of, on my website, leave it a little bit more like we kind of said about all, but it's also the same in terms of leaving it a bit more ambiguous in terms of, here are some kind of, yes, there's a couple of group shots, but there's also kind of people sat enjoying a view, or, little vignettes into what we're doing. And, it's creating a kind of series of moments that people feel like they can connect with. So that's the website. And my social media is actually going through a bit of a phase at the moment where I'm experimenting a bit more, because I was finding that I was sharing these stories with my images that were quite curated. They kind of weren't really getting the engagement. And so I've started now being a little bit more candid with my social media. So the polished photographs are featuring less on my social media, and the candid moments that are less polished are featuring more. So again, it's those kind of little vignettes into the trips, and they are engaging because people feel like it's a true reflection of what we're doing on our trips and not these kind of polished images. So I do still engage with both, but if you were to look at my Instagram, for example, there's a lot more just kind of little couple second clips interspersed with some images in my reels, and I'm experimenting with that at the moment. But like I said earlier, it's a process, and I'm kind of have this history of image making that's kind of tied up with the old ways of photography. And so connecting that in a meaningful way with social media is a bit of a journey for me. And I think they're two really separate things. Like, you can be an amazing visual storyteller, but how you put that on social media is a totally different beast.
Do you still have that giant medium format camera, and do you still use it ever?
So I haven't used it for a long time, but I was just thinking about it the other day and want to dig it out. And I also have my grandmother's old box brownie camera, which is basically an elaborate box. Like, it doesn't have anything. It has a tiny lens, a box. You have to roll your own film onto the spool. And I want to kind of dig that out as well and do some work with that. But, photography is such a broad space. And I think, just break some of those boundaries about what it can be. Like, I also use with some of my single day stuff more, but I'm going to I'm interested in starting to integrate it with my multi-day trips, where we do a little bit of cameraless photography, where we have cyanotype paper that I give out to people, and then we create our own little cyanotypes, which are kind of contact images where you place an object onto light sensitive paper and it creates an image. And it's so simple, but it really gets people to engage on a micro level with their environment. So, I do use that personally, and I do a lot of it with kind of children in the community here. My daughter and her friends like doing it, and it's a real leveler and totally kind of bursts the boundaries of what people think a photograph can be. So I do love doing that as well, because it suddenly becomes this whole different beast.
Yeah, and what that's reminded me of is the power of things that are tactile, that feel like you're a maker, and that sense of also effort. Things that take a little bit of effort, spooling that film into the camera or crafting that cyanotype is like, that's what we are as humans. Like, we want to be doing and making with our hands. We're not evolved to just look into a glowing screen and just instantly have it done.
For sure. And the craft of photography is something that's so important. And I think, just to kind of follow on from that, how we work with our images post trip, like, people often ask me, like, oh, well, do you like edit the lighting? Do you do this? Do you do that? It's like, well, photographers have always done that. In a dark room, you would add filters and you would adjust the lighting and you would adjust the contrast. Like, a little bit of tweaking can go a long way. And I'm not talking about totally changing an image, but like, just giving the levels a little tweak, just giving the lighting a little tweak. If you learn how to do that well and do it consciously, it can really transform an image into something that's kind of not particularly spectacular to something that really holds you and is like, that feels like how it felt in the moment. And you add your feeling when you're editing. That's when you add your feeling, and that's when you kind of add a bit more of the craft.
Something you said before too made me think, as you experiment with cyanotypes, experiment. I feel like the rule books haven't been written out there for how you should engage and use and think about photography on your tours. An example from my own tours, we have increasingly, I do multi-day school trips, and increasingly, I'm seeing this more and more, schools that have a no phone rule. And you were speaking about this earlier, that first the students put up a fight, but like by day 2 or by day 3, they're thankful. They feel liberated. They feel free. There's a question though of like creating like, image memories. And 2 of the ways that we've solved for that. Number 1 is we give the students sketchbooks, and we do a lot of sketching moments. And it's not about the image being brilliant that you make, but just that act of seeing by sticking your eyeballs on something for a while, the Arc de Triomphe or whatever it is, and then putting hand to paper, you're imprinting a real memory of that Arc de Triomphe from a real perspective, instead of just sightseeing, walking around, I see it, let's go, I see it, let's go. Just that, already that practice, the students, and it gives the students and equivalent adults who aren't maybe the most social, gregarious people, a chance to be expressive on a tour, a chance to like actually feel like, oh, I'm part of this in my own more introvert or quiet or artistic way. The second thing that we've done is I discovered this camera, which I'm now in love with, called Camp Snap. I don't know if you've seen this. It's a little bit of an online sensation for a little bit, but it imitates a disposable camera, but it's a digital camera. It's like $30. I think I paid like $30 for it. It has no screen. It has just the old like viewfinder that's not actually exactly what you're, seeing. And it has a USB port, but the beauty of it is that you don't get to see what you took until you develop it. And it develops it in the kind of a vintage style, right? So it also feels a little like it's like a crappy photo, but you're so proud of it. And so I'll bring those along, or have our guides bring one of those along, and that becomes like the class camera. If they want to take a photo, take it. And then the end result is not, these are my photos, but it's the combined result of the whole group each taking turns with the camera, and like this is the group trip and these are the group's photos, and it's like a collective creation rather than just like, oh, here's my little photo roll.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, it's definitely something that because I also have done a fair amount of youth and school tours, and we do a similar thing where we kind of say, sometimes we'll switch it and say, who's the photographer for today? And we kind of have a role where it gets kind of mixed up, and you'll have someone in a group gets assigned the role as photographer, and that's their kind of focus for the day. And then they get a day off and someone else has a go. And so it's kind of similar in a way to your Camp Snap concept, and I think that's a really great way of doing it. And I think taking that in a more subtle way into adult-led tours is beneficial for everybody. And like you say, it's intentional and it's engaging. And hearing you talk about the Arc de Triomphe is really interesting for me, because in terms of the big ticket places, do we need another photograph of it? Like, your sketch is going to be way more valuable than a photograph that you will take of that specific place. And I feel like it's trying to move people away from tick boxing the places that we visit and engaging with them. And so, yeah, it's mixing it up in that way. And so I totally agree with sketching as a really beautiful way of encouraging people to seek other ways to find those memories when they return from a trip.
I've really enjoyed this conversation about conscious photography that arose serendipitously from the Facebook forum, and your insights have been really beautiful and I think really helpful for the whole community. If people wanted to follow up or connect with you, where can they discover more about More to Explore?
So they can connect with me on the Tourpreneur Facebook group. So I'm on there. But yeah, they can contact me through Instagram as well. It's more to explore _Slovenia, and also through my website, or email me directly. My website's www.mtexplore.com, and my email is info@mtexplore.com. And I'm always happy to chat. And I know how it is for tour operators, especially people like me who are kind of one woman, one man bands, and thinking about photography is one more thing to think about, right? And so if I can help people to engage with that then and think about it in a different way, then I'm always happy to chat.
Mikaela, thanks for joining me on Tourpreneur.
Thanks so much for inviting me.